Hello and welcome to the No Shame Podcast. This is John Groders. Did you know that over 20 million kids are growing up in the USA today with no father in the home? And that there are even more households where dad may be present but is not really engaged? Our guest Justin Batt will share ways we can change that on No Shame.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
All right, our guest today is Justin Batt, and I'm excited to talk to you today, Justin, because this is a core topic that sort of is foundational to so many things in the world and in society, and the topic is fatherhood. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here. Thank you.
So you have been speaking and writing and engaging on the subject of fatherhood, and a word that you've been particularly reminding us of is this epidemic of fatherlessness. Can you just tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of research over the last roughly 3 decades done by the National Center for Fathering, fathers.com, and one of my board members, Ken Canfield. And Ken really has been the pioneer in this research, and what's emerged is there's 2 forms of fatherlessness. And so you've got the lack of a biological father in the home, which affects about 20 million children in the U.S. today. But then even more prevalent than that is the father who's physically present but emotionally absent. We call that presenteeism. And there are millions more fathers that are experiencing that form of fatherlessness, or children that are experiencing that form of fatherlessness here in the U.S. And that's really the group that we are trying to address through Daddy Saturday.
20 million kids being raised with no father in the home, probably at least 20 million. And then how many more with fathers who are emotionally absent? Now, I wanted to run a Bible verse by you that I was thinking of as I was getting ready to call you. And it's the verse from James 1:27, and pure and undefiled religion before God is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Now, orphans we might think of as children with 0 parents, but I think you could define orphans sometimes as children without a pair of parents as well. And it's important to God to look after orphans. And would you include in that 20 million, or that even that larger number, that these kids are in a sense orphaned?
Oh, absolutely. I would completely agree with that, and I feel like as God has called me to this platform and to impact fatherhood and impact the next generation of children, I would wholeheartedly say that fatherlessness feeds into that thought process of orphanage. And here's why: because the impacts of fatherlessness are far-reaching. If you look at most of our societal ills today, it can be traced back to the lack of having 2 engaged parents in the home, and predominantly the lack of a father. When you look at teenage pregnancy, or alcohol or drug abuse, or prison time, or poverty, or obesity, you name the bigger components of our society today that are negative stigmas, they're all impacted in greater propensity when there's the lack of a father in a home. So 100% I would define fatherlessness as a form of creating orphans in our society.
Well, if you've happened upon the No Shame Podcast today, and you've listened to us before, and you know that we try to engage in meaningful conversations with people at the intersection of faith and culture, we're clearly going to talk about fatherhood today. If you're listening and you're a mother, or if you're a single mother, I would like you to stay with us and listen to what Justin has to say. I think it'll be informative to you, and it's certainly not meant to be disrespectful to anybody who's single parenting. But if you're listening to us for whatever reason, you came across this podcast today, and you actually are a father, at whatever stage of fatherhood you are, whether you're engaged emotionally or disengaged, whether anyone can tell you how to be a dad or whether you know how to do it, this is one of those topics, I think, Justin, that it's like marriage. The very fact that we focus on it for a minute, it almost, and I don't mean, it almost doesn't matter whose advice we're listening to if they're talking about marriage. We need it. We need to be reminded what it means to be a husband or a wife, to be self-sacrificing. Parenting is the same thing. By focusing on it and reminding ourselves of the awesome calling that we have for a very brief window of time, it is helpful in the journey. would you agree that almost any advice can be, stimulating at the very least?
Oh, of course. And look, I am a self-proclaimed expert in fatherhood, and I say that completely tongue-in-cheek because I'm 38 years old. I've got 4 kids. My kids are 11, 9, 7, and 5. So I still have a long way to go before I can claim that I am an expert in parenting. However, I've spent a lot of time succeeding and failing, and have taken my own experiences and my own lack of resources and instruction or advice in my own life, and that's what caused me to write the book. It was because I felt like there wasn't a field manual for fathers or single mothers or any parent really who wanted to be more intentional and engaged and active with their children and have some solid advice on how to do so. I think we can all benefit from information, knowledge, and resources, and I am a student of reading and learning in a variety of mechanisms, and constantly am listening to podcasts or reading books or articles around the topic of parenting, because to me, it's not like you get a child and they hand you a manual at the hospital and say, this is how you need to do it. Clearly, that manual is the Bible. There's a lot of amazing wisdom in the Bible. But outside of that, we're not given anything that says this is how you do it. And so I'm open to any resources, and I hope the listeners are as well. And this is one of the many resources that are out there to help you.
So I'm speaking with Justin Batt. He's the author of a book called Daddy Saturday. And, no one's going to sort of brag about being an expert on parenting, especially before their kids are grown up. It doesn't matter if you're Dr. Spock or James Dobson or Kevin Lehman or anybody, because kids sometimes will discredit every bit of expertise you ever proclaimed and go their own way, and that can sort of sometimes seem to negate any of the thoughts that a published author or speaker would have. Now, I pray your kids all end up just exactly how I believe they will, but you know what I'm saying? If the proof is in the pudding, you can't evaluate someone teaching us how to be a parent for another 25 years. But the reality is, we can be intentional about parenting before we know if our kid's going to be a well-adjusted 40-year-old. You're not going to get another swing at this. Your kids are 11, 9, 7, and 5. These are your years. You use a line that said, days last for a long time, but years go by quickly. That's really true. Yeah,
and look, and when I said the expert thing, all I mean is that I put in a lot of hours as a dad. I got a long way to go. And, we all need that support around us. And I think that the point is that no matter where you are in your parenting journey, it's important to have perspective. And that perspective for me is just like you said, the days can be so long and the years are so short. And especially when you have young kids, the days can be really long. And another perspective that I have is, viewing your children as a blessing or a burden, and talking about that time is so limited that you have with your children. You really need to make the most of all of those opportunities. And you have a choice to view your children as a blessing or a burden. And by burden, I don't mean that any parent would view their children as a burden, but there have been times in my life where, in the example I use in the story, there are toys all over the yard from an amazing Daddy Saturday we had together, and I'm out there by myself picking them up. And at that moment, those toys and that duty that I had was certainly somewhat of a burden, and it caused me to view my children a certain way. God asked me to flip that paradigm and say, no, your children are a blessing, and these are moments or memories. Every toy represents a great part of the day that you had together. And I think that's how we need to approach this vision of parenting in life, is that we all have an opportunity to view our children and view our time as parents in a certain way, and we need to make the most of that because that time is so limited. The visual reminder that I have of that are 4 jars, glass jars, and I've got pebbles in each of those jars, and those pebbles represent a week that my children have in the home. The average child has about 900 or so weeks in the home before they turn 18 and move on at that point, hopefully, successfully into adulthood. And I visually can see that my daughter, now that she's 11, and my son that's 9, they're over halfway gone and out of the home, which 11 and 9, we don't often think that way, but that is absolutely the case.
Well, Justin, I am a couple years ahead of you in that journey, raised 2 children who have now had children. And for the last year plus, my son and daughter-in-law have moved into our house, and they brought their 2 children who are now ages 5 and 3. And so I know what you mean about this blessing versus burden, but the idea that you've given me about mindset, it's been a joy and a privilege to have them in the house, and they're leaving now. They're moving to another state, moving to Colorado in just a couple of weeks. And so, we're going to miss them terribly. Now, young children are chaotic. They're loud and they're fun and they're messy and they have a meal every 6 seconds. And so you can certainly find your mind driving towards, this is a burden, wouldn't I? You're saying you set your mind. You don't just evaluate how you happen to feel. You set your mind on that children, in my case, grandchildren, this is a blessing of God. You've got limited time with them. That changes your attitude, right?
It does. I mean, and the Bible says to take captive every thought and command it unto the Lord. And so I believe that we have the opportunity to shift our perspective. And God certainly did that for me in what I like to call a lightning bolt moment, where he had to shock me or shake me up a little bit to reframe my perspective in that capacity. But I think as parents, we all have that opportunity. And the way that our brains and that we have been designed, we have the opportunity to form what are called neural pathways in our brain. Think of it like in my backyard, we built a pool and we put in some brand new sod. And my kids and our dog would take the same pathway back and forth from the deck to the pool from the house. And pretty soon, in a couple of weeks, all of a sudden, I had this luscious green grass all around my pool, but then I had this dirt track running right from my house to the pool because they'd taken the same path over and over again. And the same thing happens in our minds, that we can essentially learn responses or reactions based on the way that we continually do that. And if we respond over and over and over as that negative or burden or critical mentality, then that tends to become the normal pathway of our brain or our reaction. If we respond positively or with grace or as a blessing, then the same is true. And so I think for us as parents, scientifically, as well as from a biblical perspective, it's so important that we frame our minds and have that appropriate perspective in engaging our children. And I'll tell you where that's become really critical for me is in the age that my kids are, it's been really important to take a step back and realize that I'm modeling for them, and far more is caught than taught. And so with my kids, if I'm expecting them not to have a temper or to display anger, then how can I expect them not to do that if I am engaging the exact behavior that I'm trying to discourage them from, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where that modeling and that perspective becomes so critical when raising your kids. And it's far easier to do it when they're younger, because when they get older into those teenage years, which you've clearly experienced, it gets much harder if you haven't done it when they're young.
If you're listening to the podcast today, this is No Shame. Our guest is Justin Batt. Maybe you're a father. I mean, the chances that you're listening today, but if you're a father, we are going to be really challenging you to think about, how can I be an intentional parent? How can I be the father that God has called me to be? Not perfect, but perfectly decisive to do the best we can. So you said there was a lightning bolt moment for you, Justin. Can you illuminate?
Yeah, I've had plenty of them in my life, and I'm fortunate. I think that, and whether it's my personality or just the way that God seems to get my attention, I'm an extreme driver. It's my personality. I'm going 100 miles an hour at all times and moving forward. And so sometimes I feel like God has to literally smack me upside the head with a lightning bolt, or put a wall in front of me to make me stop sometimes to realize things. And He's done that very beneficially in my life many times. One of those moments was after a Daddy Saturday. We had been out playing with the kids and just had an immense day of activities, and we had built obstacle courses and racetracks in the backyard and just had such a fun time together. And my wife works on Saturdays at her retail bridal store, and so that's how Daddy Saturday emerged. I'm home by myself with my kids and supporting my wife and also engaging my children. So they were tired. They'd gone into the house. We'd had 5+ hours of activity together, and I was outside looking around, and all of these toys all over our yard. They were remnants of the amazing day we had together. But as any dad is out there picking them up by myself, and every time I took a step and picked up another toy, feeling my back and going, why am I doing this by myself? Isn't that why I had 4 kids, that they'd be out here helping me do stuff like this? And it was just one of those moments where God literally looked at me and said, and put the perspective in my mind, Justin, you have a choice. Each one of these toys can be a burden and just one more thing you have to do for your kids, or you could view it as a blessing, a reminder of the amazing day that you just had together, the memory that you had with your kids. And the point here is not, that my kids were inside and then I was outside. The point is not picking up toys in the yard. The point is that as a parent, think of how many situations regardless of whether you're a mother or a father, you have a choice to make that decision, and that decision is how you're going to end up responding to your children. And like I said, no parent ever wants to view their kids as a burden or view their circumstances as a burden, but at the same time, we have a choice.
You've described another way to look at that. You talked about taking your daughter on date night and looking at the tab, and how did that story unfold?
Well, that's one of the core foundational moments of Daddy Saturday, and Daddy Saturday is more than just Saturday. That's the whole premise. We called it Daddy Saturday because that was my day with my kids while my wife worked, and one of my kids affectionately named it as such. But the principles of intentionality that come from Daddy Saturday clearly go out throughout the week and any moment that we have with our child. And so I found this idea and thought it was something I wanted to implement in my life with my only daughter, our oldest daughter, Hayden Olivia. I have 3 boys after her, and do daddy-daughter date nights. She was 3 years old, and so she got all dressed up in her cute little red dress with polka dots, and we went out to eat, and I took her to a nice restaurant. I'm dressed in a suit. We sat upstairs at this fabulous booth overlooking downtown Charleston and just had an incredible meal. I had the incredible meal. She had butter noodles and Shirley Temple and just enjoying slurping her noodles and having a great time. And it was at that moment I recounted in the TED Talk as well as the book. I kind of looked up at her and I'm like, wow, this is such an amazing moment. At the same time, what do you talk about with your 3-year-old daughter? What does that conversation look like? Is she even going to remember this? Is she going to enjoy this? And turns out she did. Turns out she does. And those were the beginnings of forming a very strong relationship that I have with my daughter. And it's those moments of communication, those moments of opening up that pathway to communication where she knows that she can talk to Dad anytime. And if she really needs to talk or there's something really important, then it's, hey, Dad, can we have a date night? And I know that's code for, hey, I want to talk to you about something. And at 11 years old, now she's entering those pre-nager years, those preteen years. We've had several circumstances where that's come full circle. We still do our daddy-daughter date nights, but we started at 3 years old. And I look at the investment and the stakes that we put in the sand all those years and all those times in our relationship. Man, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And that's why I said when I got done with dinner that night, I felt the receipt in my pocket. I looked at it, and I spent over $70 on dinner, most of that being mine, of course, but at the same time, $70 on dinner with my daughter. But now looking back, what an investment that was, because we have such a strong relationship, not perfect, but a great relationship between father and daughter, and those date nights were a big part of that. And it goes back to being intentional.
Listen, that is a fantastic way to think about parenting, because you can always think of something else to do with whatever resources or money you have, whether it's your time or whether it's your dollars. There's always something that needs to be fixed, purchased, invested in, something wiser, something more secure financially. And you say that I didn't waste money having dinner with my daughter. I made a $70 investment in one of the most important people in my life. That's a fantastic way to look at it.
Well, and I think, we talk a lot about in Daddy Saturday, our time together being epic. And that was clearly an epic moment for me in my life with my daughter. And I remember that day like it's anything else. I even have the business card framed from the restaurant on my desk in honor of that memory and of that first date night with my 3-year-old. But those epic moments, they don't have to be expensive or extraordinary, extravagant. They just have to be intentional. And
Right.
so, whether you can afford a $10 meal or a $5 meal with your child, again, it doesn't matter. That was the choice that we made, and I was trying to do it to make a point because, frankly, my bigger goal when I went into it was showing my daughter what a respectable man should do. You should take her to a nice place, open the door, be chivalrous, say please and thank you, show courtesy to the staff, all the things that I expected a guy to do for her, and to set the bar really high so that when she meets that guy one day, those are really my motivations going into it.
That's right.
But coming out of it, I received far more than I ever expected.
Interestingly, when you look back on the 20 years or so that you'll be in the parenting mode, it will not be surprising that the things that remain in your mind, just like you're remembering now 8 years later, that one night with your 3-year-old, are the times you invested yourself in them. You probably won't remember the times you were frustrated or short or disappointed or tired, but you will remember clearly those moments that you invested in your kids. It makes it, we all will have our connection points. If you're listening to the podcast, what are your connection points as a kid? You maybe remember that if you had parents that invested in you at all or were intentional with you, can you recall now and say, boy, those family vacations that I thought were hot and long drives, they shaped me. Or maybe you had a dad who played ball with you in the backyard. I did. And I appreciate it. And you remember those things. Your kids will remember those things that you invest in them. It seems, Justin, like you might be, we used the word expert earlier, and I like how you brought up Malcolm Gladwell's definition of an expert, which is anyone who's spent 10,000 hours doing one thing. You become an expert if you spend 10,000 hours. So you may not have 4 PhDs behind your name, but how many hours have you put into, being an intentional parent?
At this point, if you add up all my Saturdays and combine all of my kids and their ages, I put over 13,000 hours in Saturday time engaging my kids in intentional ways.
Okay, so we are talking with Dr. Justin Batt, professor of parenting with a degree from the highest college in the world. 13,000 hours is a lot of time. It
is. But see, here's the thing, and this is where I don't have a PhD. I'm not a psychologist, and I've read a lot of books that the people like that have written, and the Meg Meekers, the Dr. James Dobsons of the world, and phenomenal books. I have learned so much about parenting from people that have written books that are experts in that perspective. But what I found where the gap was and the deficiency for me is I didn't see a lot of people talking about how you actually engage your kids, how you actively pursue your kids and that relationship to create those memories and those moments, regardless of what age your kids are. And that's the exact segment that I was looking to target and focus on. And really, it's that second form of fatherlessness, right? It's the physically present but emotionally absent. Well, one of the ways you can get a father to be re-engaged emotionally is by having them be activated and take movement towards their children. Mm-hmm. And I believe that feelings follow behaviors. Behaviors don't follow feelings. So for many of those fathers that are emotionally detached from their children, it's because they're feeling a certain way. They're feeling insecure. They're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling like they don't know how. They're feeling, stressors from life or their environment or their circumstances. And so those things prevent them from engaging their kids. Well, if you can remove the feeling and instead engage in the behavior, so, hey, get out there and start playing with your kids, and here's an idea for how to do that. Do a water balloon fight. Pretty soon they're engaged with their kids, and all of a sudden, guess what? Now they're physically present and they're emotionally present because the feelings have now followed those behaviors. And that's the premise behind Daddy Saturday. It's extremely simple, and nothing that I propose is complicated. Again, I'm not a PhD. I'm just a dad who's out there doing it and experienced the dramatic change for myself and my heart and my relationship with my kids. And I felt that other dads could benefit from the same thing.
I'm talking with Justin Batt, author of Daddy Saturday. And Justin, all right, now we're going to get down to where the water balloon meets the road, because sometimes as dads, all right, you've got my attention, and I'm like, okay, the years are going fast. I do want to invest in my kids. All right, let's just talk about some of the things you've done, because sometimes we just need practical suggestions. You just mentioned a water balloon fight earlier. You said something about an obstacle course in your yard. What do you mean by that? What did you do?
So early on with Daddy Saturday, it was really what we could find around the house. So I would look and come up with an idea. I'd either watch YouTube videos or Google something, or think about what my kids were playing with and interacting with. And then my idea was, if you remember the show Tool Time with Tim the Toolman Taylor, mm-hmm. and he would always try to soup up whatever he was doing, and he'd have the rah, 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 manly grunt afterwards. That was kind of my initial modus operandi for Daddy Saturdays. I would look for ways to take what my kids would normally do or what we had on the house and just make it more engaging or more epic. And so we would do a lot of simple things. We would build obstacle courses. We would take a Hot Wheels or a Matchbox car track and try to make it the longest track we could possibly find. I went to Lowe's Home Improvement, and I bought as many rolls of bubble wrap as they had. And I bubble wrapped my kids in these sumo suits and made jousting sticks and swords and put them on our trampoline, and they had a bubble wrap battle. And it was one of the most hilarious things you've ever seen, because Mason, my 5-year-old at the time, kept falling over, and he was so wrapped up that he was like a turtle, and he couldn't get back up. And he was crying. The other kids were laughing, and it was just one of those moments that we still talk about as a family.
Mason's traumatized, but the other kids thought it was great.
Yeah. And he's the one he's my tough guy. So he loves now to talk about that. And he keeps asking, can we do it again? Can we do it again? We've done obstacle courses, and most of the time those have been failures because I am not handy. I grew up throwing a curveball and a spiral, not building things. And so, that is a deficiency of mine. So I try hard, and we try to make these ideas. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But at the end of the day, it's the practice of being engaged. So I have evolved Daddy Saturday. We have done so many activities over so many weekends that now, I have merged the platform. And what I mean by that is we've created opportunities to help other dads. And so a lot of our ideas, we're not trying to take to the next level and just make it more fun and engaging to get the attention of those in our social community so that we draw them into the platform. But the practical application now comes from a couple of sources. One, there's ideas in the book. Two, we just released an Alexa skill. So if you have an Alexa device, your phone or an Amazon Echo or Dot or whatever form of Alexa you use, you can literally now enable the Daddy Saturday skill, and you can ask Alexa, ask Daddy Saturday, and it'll source the weather in your area, give you an indoor or outdoor activity, and it will then provide the instructions and the items in your shopping list that you may need to source for the day, and you can order them Amazon Prime. They show up in your house in a day or two. So I've made it really simple for dads, because the number one thing I get is, what do I do or how do I do it? And so that is one form of answering that question. We have lots of other resources. But I would say, regardless of all of that, if you're a dad or a single mom or any parent seeking to engage your kids and be intentional, what I would say is just do your research. Spend some time I do it on Wednesday nights. That's the night that works for me, because it gives me time to prepare for my Saturdays. And I spend about an hour, and I take time investing in what I'm going to do with my kids on Saturday. And we're intentional, and I go and source the materials if I have to. I use what we have around the house. I engage other dads, or other guides, as I call them, and bring them in, and we have our days together. If I do that, 9 times out of 10, it's epic. We have a blast. If I don't, and I just kind of walk into my day or my time with my children, then it tends to not go so well, because I wasn't intentional, I didn't plan, and you're shooting from the hip, and it doesn't work out. So again, it doesn't have to be expensive, extraordinary, extravagant. Just has to be intentional.
That is fantastically practical advice. Dads, if you're listening, or moms or grandparents or uncles, or I'll have to admit, Justin, I'm good at making up games on the spot. And being playful was something that we did with our kids, but no one ever challenged me to sit down on Wednesday night for an hour and think through how I could be spontaneously playful on Saturday. I got to admit, that's a fantastic idea.
Well, thank you. And I would say that approach goes into everything. And, sometimes people may push back and say, well, I don't have the time. I would say, really? You don't have the time? You can't find, it doesn't have to be an hour, but there's got to be some margin. Don't watch TV one night a week, right? Or there's got to be a way that you can find that time. For me, the advice that I give to people really practically is calendar everything, and don't separate your business or your professional and your personal calendars. I know a lot of people say, you should put a boundary up between work and home, and you leave work at work when you get home, and you engage with your family. I think that's true in many capacities. I don't think it's true when you're talking about calendaring or scheduling, and here's why. Because if you blend your two calendars, then it allows you to do things like, on that Wednesday, you put that on the calendar. Here's my hour of planning time. You block it off just like you'd block off any meeting or any appointment or any call you'd have for your professional workday. If you have a date night with your daughter or your wife, and by the way, if you take your daughter on date nights, you better do your wife at least 2 times more than you take your daughter. You're going to get in trouble.
It's another talk.
Additionally, another talk, a kid's ball game, any of those things, they all need to be calendared, and you treat them the way you treat a business meeting. And if you have to leave work early, or you have to make accommodations, then you do that. The only reason you cancel them is an emergency or a disaster or something terrible happens. And you don't ever let those appointments slip aside. If you do that, then you'll find it becomes far easier to be intentional, because now you've planned it on paper, on purpose, ahead of time, and you're able to honor those commitments. Because the hardest promise to keep is the one you don't want to. And the way to experience tension is when you have the demands pulling you on both sides. And if you've planned it on paper, on purpose, it eliminates a lot of those components.
Really, I wanted to get into the balancing of career and family with you, and the stresses of how hard it is, to do that for people. But what you just said, as far as manage your own calendar, don't let it manage you. And I've got the kind of job where I can stay here till midnight every night. The work is never done, and so there's always a reason to put another 3 or 4 hours in what you're doing. If those are the hours where your kids are missing out on your engagement with them, then those hours they're not going to come back to you. So your idea of taking that calendar and integrating your work schedule and this intentional family schedule, even the hour on Wednesday night where you're going to block that time off so that that will be your time to plan for what you're going to do on Saturday or whenever it works for you, that you're going to have some fun with your kids, intentional engagement. This is fantastic advice, and I just pray that people find themselves listening to a podcast not knowing they were going to be challenged in this way, but they're here and they've been listening, and it's practical advice for so many valuable relationships. Parenting being a critical one for you, and you've got now kids 11, 9, 7, and 5. I gotta say, are you having fun on Saturdays, or are you doing this out of discipline?
So, we still have a blast, and it's interesting you asked that question. There was several Saturdays ago, it's about a month ago now, right towards the end of the school year, right? Kids are excited to get out of school. The year's almost over. We're just going 100 miles an hour. And I kind of looked at my kids one Saturday and I said, guys, I'm just not feeling the same level of excitement, and I like to do a lot of hype. So in the morning I got the music playing, I'm up early. They come out and we got, the music's going. Sometimes I have the Daddy Saturday banner up and they gotta run through the banner like they're launching into a football game. I'm making chocolate chip pancakes. We're having fun, getting the day going. We've done that for years. And, so that's a part of it. And I wasn't feeling the excitement, and I wasn't feeling it as much. And so I asked them, I said, guys, look, we invest a lot of time, sometimes some money and resources, and this needs to be fun. So I feel like I'm doing the heavy lifting, and it's my fault. I need to involve you guys more in Daddy Saturdays. And my kids were old enough now that they had the ability to do that. And so one thing that worked for me, and I think would work for a lot of people listening if they have children that are entering into those teenage years or are teenagers today, one of the best things you can do is ask your kids what they want to do and what they enjoy, and just sit down and be quiet, right, when you have that conversation. And what are your kids passionate about? What do they enjoy? And that can help you formulate what you do on those Saturdays or in that time with your children. And I have a great mentor who told me one of the best things you can do is ask your kids an open-ended question about a topic like that, and you tap your foot for 10 seconds. Before you even get to 10, they're going to start answering the question. And here's the secret sauce. The secret sauce is when they finish answering, before you can say, oh, that's great, honey, or that sounds so good, or I appreciate that, you don't say anything. You stay quiet, and you tap your foot for 5 more seconds. And before you finish that, most times, they're going to start into a second dialogue, and they're going to shift gears. And that's the secret sauce, because oftentimes that's where you're going to really get the meaning of what they really wanted to say, because they've had time to formulate their thoughts, and they're going to be able to communicate that. And what I've found is that in doing so, it's allowed them to be involved, and they're now more engaged. I have a daughter and 3 boys. It's really easy for us to slant those days towards the boys and doing guy stuff. So involving my daughter, making sure that appeals to all of us, is a big key. And in doing that, we've gotten back to some of those moments of having a lot of fun and really just enjoying our days together. And I'll say this, as I look back on all of our Daddy Saturdays and the body of work that we've built, and I call it my dad resume, some of the finer moments or bullet points on my dad's resume are when we've done some of the most simple things. And that's what my kids talk about. That's what they remember. The bubble wrap battle being one of those, right? Really simple, inexpensive. It took a little creativity, and they talk about that all the time, and they will look back on that one. I know we'll talk about it years later.
Especially Mason, who hasn't recovered. You talk about the difference between you having to be the hero and letting the kids begin to experience that they're the hero in their own story. And I think this bit about tapping your foot and listening is a step in that direction. What do you mean by that? That hero thing? I'm
so glad you brought this up, because this is a incredibly important point that all of your listeners need to get. And I'm going to say something that's contradictory and even a bit provocative, because many fathers feel like they need to be the hero. They want that T-shirt. They want to be the one with the big Superman S on their chest. And I get that. I do too as a dad. But let me tell you something. You're actually doing your children a disservice. And this just isn't my opinion at this point. This is proven now with data and fact. As you look at the millennial generation, as they have entered into adulthood, you now see an entire generation, and they've got a bunch of different nicknames. You may call them the snowflake generation, and a lot of that comes from the fact that they had helicopter or snowplow or commando parents that basically made every decision for them. They never allowed them to fail. And so their parents, their father in particular, was the hero of their story. And in doing so, prevented their children from experiencing failure or making mistakes in their youth. And as I like to say, failure or a mistake at 8 years old is far different than a mistake at 28 years old. You know, skinning your knee when you fall off your bike is far different than losing your job or getting a divorce or something far worse in adulthood. And what we're seeing now with the millennial generation is that, by and large, and I'm also saying this from experience, I've managed and led teams and worked with large groups of millennials, and what I've found and what I've seen and what the data shows is that they haven't experienced failure in their youth, and when they get to adulthood, they don't have the mechanisms to deal with it appropriately, to learn from failure and to move forward. So by flipping the script and following the script like every movie that's ever been made, think of a Star Wars where you've got Luke Skywalker as the hero, you've got Darth Vader as the villain, you've got a conflict that occurs, and then you've got Yoda, the little green guy. I'm proposing that fathers be like Yoda. And in doing so, you allow your children to experience success or failure, to have the consequences of their decisions. You're there to make sure that it's not catastrophic, they don't hurt themselves, and that they learn from it. And in doing so, they are allowed to grow and develop and move forward into successful adulthood. And here's the thing that I learned, that this was a mind-blown moment for me that I didn't expect. When I did this, it also dropped my ego, dropped my ability to want to be all things to my kids at all times, and it allowed me to bring other guides into their life. And so I mentioned I'm not very handy. I'm also not a hunter-fisherman. And so we live on the coast. We've got the ability to go fishing in saltwater. And so I have no clue. I grew up fishing in lakes and ponds in Northwest Ohio. Fishing in saltwater off of a boat is way beyond my scope of knowledge and expertise. So I've brought fathers in who have great knowledge and expertise there, who literally are a guide, a fishing guide in this circumstance, and have shown my kids how to fish in saltwater. We have had amazing moments together. And guess what's the ironic thing of the whole situation? My kids think I'm the hero because I brought another guide in to help them experience that.
Exactly.
And it's a great lesson on allowing them to see that, hey, look, Dad doesn't know everything. And when Dad doesn't know something, instead of acting like I do or pretending or just, showing my insecurities, I go find somebody that does, and I learn from them. What a great lesson for your kids. And that's what being the guide can do.
That's a word to those of us that might be that fishing guide for somebody else's kids too. Like, you're not, even if it's your kids out of the house, boy, you've got a role to play. It is great for you to have come to some of these thoughts and conclusions while your kids are still at the ages they are, 5 through 11. I mean, you are thinking ahead, and your thinking ahead is clear. You recognize that you're training and raising these kids not so that you can smother them and hold them in the nest forever and they can become your sort of feather in your cap, but you're raising them so that they can, as you say, become adults. You're not trying to raise just good kids, you're trying to raise good adults. Or how do you phrase that?
Yeah, raise good kids that become great adults.
It's essential. I wrote a book with my son we did a movie called The Frontier Boys, and my son Jed was in the movie, and it was a boys coming of age, high school age kids. When it was done, the publisher of the movie asked us to do a book together, and so we wrote a book called Raising a Modern Frontier Boy. Some of these same thoughts about what you're talking about. He was 22 at the time, and we wrote alternating chapters, and we didn't read each other's chapters until the book was collated. And
Wow.
It was fascinating. It's still interesting for me to read the things that I did with him and that worked, that thank you, God, that was a positive connection point. I'm so glad. And the times where it didn't work, and he was in a boat in waters that I didn't know and didn't see and had missed. They're both part of the journey. And the Raising a Modern Frontier Boy book also just forced me to recognize exactly the point you just made, how critical it was that we weren't the only voices in our kids' lives. We were a critical voice and critical influence, but thank God for others who came along and brought, deep sea fishing or levels of encouragement or excitement in the faith that was just beyond our ability to carry, and it was essential to raising our kids too.
Yeah, and I think as we all look back at our own childhood, there were probably other formidable people that came into our lives and influenced us in hopefully positive ways. And as I look back at my life, my faith, my coaches, my pastors, my teachers, parents, friends, right? There was a lot of people that influenced me and helped me become the person that I am today. And I believe that God placed a lot of those people, if not all of them, in my life for a very specific reason. There was no coincidence. And as I look back, I can see how they were all building blocks and helping me become the person that I am today and to honor the calling that I'm now called to. And, I feel like that's my job as a parent, is to understand what my kids' passions are and what their purpose is, help them identify that, find that, and then give them all the support they need to then walk into it. And that's what I really mean when I say great adults. It's that they are living out the purpose that they were put here for. And I can only hope that, my kids are able to achieve that one day, because as many have said, you ask how hard that someone works when they're working in their passion. They say, I've never worked a day in my life, because they're doing what they love and what they enjoy and what they're called to do. And I certainly feel like I do that when I'm in Daddy Saturday mode, and I hope that my kids have the same, and that I can help many other parents help their kids do that as well.
Well, this is the No Shame Podcast, and we're listening to a conversation with Justin Batt. And if you're a dad or a parent or responsible for a child, I hope this conversation is encouraging to you. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be even Yoda with all the wisdom of the world. You just have to take some bubble wrap and go do something intentional with your kids. You just have to try to build an obstacle course or a Hot Wheel track, or maybe it's skipping stones, or maybe it's throwing a ball on a wet dock. But the time you invest intentionally with your kids, where they know you care about them and you're listening to them and you're tapping your foot and you're letting them drive the conversation and you're being interested in what they're interested in, at the same time letting them fail and learn how to survive failure. This is not wasted time. This is some of the most important things you will do with your life. And Justin, you've reminded of this. You've reminded us of this. And just maybe, this is sort of putting you on the spot, but any last words of advice to fathers who are riding down the road right now listening to this podcast, anything you'd want to close with?
I think it all comes down to this, that it revolves around intentionality. And all of us as fathers have the perfect model of the ultimate father in our life, and that's Jesus and his relationship with God in heaven. And that was modeled for us. And the more that we can be like Jesus and stay strong in our faith, stay strong in the Word, the more we're going to be able to show up as the fathers that we want to be when we command those intentional moments. And that is a charge and a challenge I give to every father, is to be intentional, be engaged, and to break this cycle of fatherlessness, whether that be there is no father in the home and you need to step up and be that father figure to another child or family, or in your own family, you're there physically, but you just haven't been there emotionally as much as you need to be. There are plenty of second chances. Kids are resilient. It's never too late. Re-engage your kids. Be intentional. Be engaged. And you will raise good kids that become great adults. And you're going to have some incredible memories that'll last a lifetime. And you're only one Saturday away.
Well, Justin, I pray a blessing on you and your wife, your 4 kids, the investment you're making, and I believe the promises of the scriptures. They're true. Raise a child in the way he should go or she should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. It's not a game that you're going to lose. We're given promises, and you're doing it. Thank you for being with us on the No Shame podcast today. And guys, remember, you can go to Alexa, and you can say, Ask Daddy Saturday, and you'll get some good ideas of what you can do with those crazy 5-year-old girls. They're very hard to entertain, but Daddy Saturday will help you. Thank you, Justin, for being with us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Have no shame. No, we are not afraid. No shame. On the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.
No Shame is a weekly podcast where John Groders discusses life at the intersection of faith and culture with all kinds of interesting and inspiring guests. Subscribe to the podcast today by going to johngroders.com, select the podcast tab, and hit subscribe. Listen whenever you have time, but don't miss any of these life-giving conversations.